Great. Okay, so Chris Ott, Deputy
All
Director of the
right.
High Speed Rail Alliance.
Yeah,
Take it
well,
away.
thank you. Thank you, Chris, for arranging this. And even though I don't think she's, on the meeting tonight, thanks to Joyce as well as, as Chris said, for setting this up appropriately enough. The idea for this started in a conversation that Joyce and I had at the Stone Creek Coffee just across the street from the Intermodal in Milwaukee. Just, the perfect setup. And thank you all for being here. It's good to see some familiar names and faces, and thank you for the work that that you all are doing through CNU and in other ways. I mean, it sounds like we have some real experts here. So please, if I get anything wrong or maybe don't know what I don't know, please let me know. Jenna, it's interesting to hear your role at HNTB. You probably do know a lot more about some of these things or the state of play for Wisconsin plants than I do. But anyway, thank you. I appreciate the chance to talk. And let's just, I've got some slides to show. I'm going to try to share my screen and hope the technology works. And are you all seeing this slide now?
Yep, you're
Okay,
good.
great. All right. Well, so thanks again. And it sounds like our organizations do have a lot in common. And so let's talk about that in the context of what's going on for trains in the United States right now. It's an exciting time for a bunch of different reasons. We've got, of course, a very supportive administration in Washington right now. There seems to be just rising public interest and awareness in this. The word is really getting out. More and more people know about the excellent train systems that other countries have and come back wondering why we don't have that here. Trains are getting more attention as a climate solution, as an alternative to the airline meltdowns that we've seen. There's just a lot of things that are coming together. And conveniently enough, there is some money available too, thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law that passed just about a couple of years ago. At this point, there's a multi-year pot of money available for passenger rail projects throughout the country. It won't be nearly enough for what we ideally should be doing, and at the same time, it's just an unprecedented level of funding, $66 billion. So that should at least be enough for us to lay some good foundations for the future. So let's start talking soon about what that might look like. But just before we really get into it, for anyone who's not already familiar with the organization that I represent, the High Speed Rail Alliance, I wanted to just give you the basics about that. I do my work as deputy director for the Alliance remotely from Madison, where I live. But we are a national organization based in Chicago. We've been around in one form or another for about 30 years now. And the main thing that the Alliance aims to do is to be the best source of information about what high-speed rail is, the benefits that it can bring, and how to achieve it. And alongside that sort of general mission statement, we have three top objectives, and those are a federal railroad program with annual funding. The 5 years of funding that we get from the bipartisan infrastructure law is great, but that won't, we'll need more than that. And much like the interstate highway system, which took decades to build and cost hundreds of billions in today's dollars, it's going to take a serious investment of time and money to build a really modern American rail network. So that's a top priority for us. We also want to get at least one high-speed line in service at 106 or 186 miles an hour or more by the year 2030, this decade. And there are at least two projects that are in the running to do that. And we can talk more about that if you'd like later. But just to hit the highlights or our top objectives, the third one is investment in Chicago, because Chicago, as you probably all know, has served for a long time as the rail hub for a lot of North America. And we've taken a close look at that and at what we could do to modernize the Chicago rail hub, and have found that making a few strategic investments, building a few bridges, making a few connections, making some improvements in and around Union Station in Chicago could really dramatically increase Chicago's capacity to serve as a modern rail hub. And that's important for all of us who kind of live in the greater Chicago region, defined kind of loosely, but Chicago, the lines that radiate out from Chicago across the continent serve more than 500 cities. So what we do in Chicago can really have widespread benefits for a lot of the country. So those are our top objectives. And let's, to get into something more substantive, something that we think is very important is planning transportation networks. And we focus at the Alliance, of course, as our name suggests, we focus on high-speed lines. And so as an example, let's talk about this pair of cities, Chicago and Indianapolis. Right now, as some of you may know, there essentially isn't a way, or at least not a good way, to travel between these two cities. Even though these are significant American cities, there isn't even a daily train that goes between Chicago and Indianapolis, and when it does go, the schedule is pretty inconvenient. So, for most people, this is just not a practical way to get between those two cities. So, a high-speed line linking these cities, with fast service, a frequent, operating frequently, every 2 hours or even every hour would be great. But high-speed rail is not just about city pairs, it's about the whole network. So let's put some other cities on this map. Just to illustrate, if this blue line represents the ridership that you might get just from people who live in Chicago and Indianapolis, that would be a good thing, as I just said. But the more cities that you connect to the network with closely coordinated schedules, so that if you're coming in from Cincinnati or Rockford or whatever, you don't have to wait around for hours, you can just sort of transfer easily to the high-speed line, that makes it useful to more people. And the better we do at that, it makes more and more trips possible. Trips from Rockford to Cincinnati or Louisville to Milwaukee. The better connected it all is, the more useful it is. And then you end up with much greater ridership that helps to justify the investment in this, and also hopefully builds momentum to do more of this in other regions and other parts of the country. So that's at a kind of high level. That's part of what we advocate for, the whole network. And getting well-planned rail networks like that with good connections, of course, takes planning. And at the risk, for CNU, at the risk of putting up, this map, which shows our national highway system, this shows that Americans can do planning. Whatever you may think of the highway system that we have, all its pluses and minuses, it took some real planning to put a system this comprehensive together, and of course a huge financial investment as well. So we need to do something like that for American rail. That work is still at a pretty early stage, and a lot of it is or needs to happen at the state level. The state that has the biggest lead at this point is California. We hope that other states, or we know that other states are starting to move in the right direction, but California, for several years already, has had a really ambitious rail or statewide transportation plan aiming for the year 2040 that has high-speed rail as part of it, but only a part of it. You may know that California is already building. They've got 119 miles of high-speed line under construction for a line that will run between the Bay Area and Los Angeles through the Central Valley of California. But so that will be kind of the backbone of the system that they're proposing. But I don't know how well you can read the legend. The vertical orientation of this map might not be ideal for this slide, but the California plan calls for tight integration with other trains, intercity trains to other parts of California and to other states, to regional trains, also sometimes known as commuter trains, and of course the bus network. So what they want to do is make it possible to get from just about anywhere in California to just about anywhere else in California via this transportation system. So it's great what they've done, and we hope that other states will emulate this. And I know, as we were setting this up, Chris asked me to talk about what high-speed rail and this can do for cities. And so I found this this nice illustration of what Rochester, New York is trying to do. And as far as I know, there is no way to do with an airport what is illustrated here. You know, I don't think there are any airports that are in downtown city or town centers, but you can absolutely do that with a train station. And in fact, at least west of the Appalachians, a lot of American cities were essentially founded by the coming of the railroad, or at least that went hand in hand. So you can have train stations really work well as the anchor for intermodal transit centers like this one that's so nicely illustrated here. And as you can probably see, or I hope you can see, they envision connections by bus, by taxi, by a tram, having people bike there, easy pedestrian access, and you know, something that is really an asset to the cities downtown. So this, I think, is a great model. And you know, just imagine if I mentioned that the lines that radiate out from Chicago across the continent, you know, those lines serve 500 cities. Imagine if most or all of those 500 cities had an intermodal transit center like this. It would just really transform the way that we live and travel. In preparing, let's talk a little bit more about Wisconsin. In preparing for this talk, I thought I could use some images, and so I Googled something like ideal intermodal transit center, and a surprising number of the hits that came up were about Milwaukee. So there, you know, that's the screenshot on the left shows Milwaukee, and if you've been there, you know, the area that it's in, you know, it's a little rough around the edges, could probably use some, you know, some more development. But it checks a lot of the boxes. It's got trains, it's got intercity buses. You can see the bubbler bikes available here. It's across the street from the streetcar. It's downtown-ish. You know, you can walk or take the streetcar over to the public market, or you know, to Wisconsin Avenue or other parts of Milwaukee's downtown. So I can see why it's ranking high in you know, as an intermodal station. And then this photo here on the right is actually an old train station in Racine, which is currently used as a waiting room for the city's bus network. They have a big hub right, you know, sort of to the, you know, out the windows to the left here. But the city, I know, wants to bring train service. I mean, Chris or someone mentioned the KRM project, which yes, the city, you know, they want to bring train service back. So in this picture, you know, I happened to be there on a Tuesday, I think, last year at some point. It's pretty quiet. But you know, imagine if there were if you could get to and from this station to Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, Green Bay, you know, that would really bring this place to life, and then the area around it as well, which is, you know, currently kind of depressed. I think it would really revitalize that part of Racine. I'm going to talk a bit about Amtrak in the next slides, but if you're not familiar with this already, there's Amtrak has some competition from a private company called Brightline. I haven't had a chance to ride it myself, but it sure looks like they have nice modern trains. They're running pretty quickly. They have frequent service. I think it's every hour between Miami and Orlando. And as these ads show, they are advertising the things that people can do by riding the train. You can get to restaurants in Miami, you can get to ball games, you can get to concerts. I'm on their mailing list, and they send an email like this every other day, probably. So, you know, they're really, their train service, I think, is really stimulating. You know, hopefully it's going to stimulate new development, but it's also just sort of bringing people to and from some, you know, city attractions. You know, they're contributing to the life of the cities that they serve, and making it possible for people to get to and from those places without driving or using some other form of transportation. So what could this look like in Wisconsin? Well, here's what we have now. Leaves you know, it leaves a lot to be desired. There is for many of you, maybe all of you know this, but the Amtrak runs 7 trains a day, they're called the Hiawatha, between Milwaukee and Chicago. It's actually one of the most successful lines in the country in terms of its on-time performance, and it nearly breaks even, or at least it did before the pandemic. But still, it's only serving southeastern Wisconsin and pretty a relatively small area. There's also one train a day in each direction between Chicago and the Pacific Northwest, which of course passes through Wisconsin. These 4 or 5 communities here: Tillamook, Wisconsin Dells, Portage, etc. And that's probably great if you live in one of those cities, but of course this train doesn't have much to offer for people who live in Green Bay or Madison or Eau Claire or places like that. So what we have now is pretty limited. However, there's some hopeful news. This map comes from Amtrak. A couple of years ago, they put out a plan for a really ambitious expansion of their service. This map, of course, shows Wisconsin and a little bit more of the Midwest. The darker blue lines show existing service that they have. The light blue lines show what they want to add. And so they are talking about adding service to Green Bay, to Madison, to Eau Claire on the way to the Twin Cities. And though it's cut off, they want to have service to Duluth, Superior as well. So that would really bring train service to a lot more Wisconsin communities and a much bigger share of Wisconsin's population. So this is a step in the right direction. And WisDOT has already applied for federal funding to study these new corridors that are proposed here. So that is an important step in the process. We'll hopefully find out within a few months whether WisDOT gets that federal funding to conduct those studies on the corridors. The High-Speed Rail Alliance is looking even beyond that. And this map to the left shows our vision for Wisconsin. These thicker blue lines more or less correspond to the lines on Amtrak's map, the lines that Amtrak and WisDOT want to add. But we think that a few are missing, and that ideally we should be reaching for more. We've heard from people in Green Bay and the Fox Valley, for instance, that they would really like to have an east-west connection across the state. So we've got that in here so that people could get to and from the Fox cities and places like Eau Claire and the Twin Cities. There is another way to get into Madison more directly from Chicago via cities like Janesville. So we've got that one on this map. And there's another corridor between Milwaukee and Chicago that could be used, that could serve, Metra from Chicago already goes to Kenosha, but if you extend that, it could go to downtown Racine, that station that I showed you, and just provide more capacity for getting into and out of Milwaukee. The current corridor seems to be limited to, it might be hard to get more than 10 trains a day there, but if we opened up this other corridor, we could have more. And then the green lines show bus connections, so that even for cities and towns that wouldn't have a train station, our aim is to still make it possible for people to get into the system, to get to a train station relatively easily. And if we had a system like this, of course, it would provide cleaner, safer, faster travel options by car for a lot of trips, and even by plane some of the time. This would provide statewide service to and from most cities in Wisconsin. We think that we should aim for great intermodal connections at whatever stations are built, as we were talking about before. And a system like this would really provide statewide benefits, which we think will give the best chance of building support, the political support that we'll need to keep moving in this direction. So with that, why don't I stop here? Here's my contact information if anyone wants to reach out in the future. But if anyone has questions or comments, if there's time to talk, I'd be glad to do that.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. I've gotten I'm used to getting brief updates from you at things like DMI and stuff. I've never gotten the big picture before. So I'm really glad that we set this up and now we have that. I also like that you included the Rochester example, because if folks don't know, that's a city that got rid of their inner loop highway. So there's this whole all kinds of stuff going on there to sort of pivot in a new direction. I think a lot of folks in CNU and probably here are thinking about whether those kinds of possibilities are real in Milwaukee, and you know what a new Milwaukee downtown could look like if we had, you know, a different sort of highway and rail and everything. So yeah, interesting stuff to think about. I've got some questions, but I will let other folks jump in first for sure.
Hey guys.